Welcome to episode 12 of the Riser Sports Podcast. I'm Greg Strong, the Canadian Press, joined as always by Ted Wyman of the Winnipeg Sun. And we are thrilled to be joined in a few minutes by Jeff Hamilton of the Winnipeg Free Press. Teddy, what's going on in Winnipeg, man? Did you enjoy the eclipse?
Well, it was only partial here, and I didn't really see it. I was working. Didn't even get dark, really. So not quite the excitement as it would have been down your way, but gee, man, what was your impression of the eclipse?
I was on duty as well, Ted, underneath the dome at Rogers Center, chatting with the Blue Jays and actually getting a tour of the new dome facility. They completely gutted the lower bowl, as you probably know, took out the turf. They completely redid the player facilities underneath and then put in, like 20,000 new seats, something like that. Really impressive looking ballpark. We can touch on it later. When I say ballpark, I mean it's still kind of a multi-use facility, as much of a ballpark as you can get with artificial turf and not natural grass. We can go into that too. But all in, I think it was a pretty cloudy day. I heard the reports in the GTA were of a so-so eclipse experience, but nicer down towards Niagara Falls and then out east as well. So all good for
Blue
those who
Jays
got to
really
enjoy
like to
it.
steal the thunder of a big story, don't they?
That's right. That's right.
Well, I know from talking beforehand, our producer Alex was also inside and didn't get to see it. So it's only a once in a lifetime thing, guys. Don't worry about it.
No big deal. No big deal. Well, Teddy, we are thrilled, as always, to welcome another guest onto the pod. And this week, we're pleased to be joined by Winnipeg Free Press reporter Jeff Hamilton. Jeff has worked on the investigative team at the Free Press and has also done plenty of sports reporting over the years, covering the NHL's Jets and the CFL's Blue Bombers. Jeff is also president of the Football Reporters of Canada Media Group. It's a pleasure now to welcome Jeff Hamilton to the Riser. Jeff, welcome.
Gentlemen, it's been, as we talked about off screen, probably the Riser's biggest fan. Ted can attest to this. I've already said this. I've actually listened to episodes not once but twice in the past before, just to pass time. That probably is more of an indictment into my list of current podcasts that I'm listening to right now. But certainly a pleasure to be on, guys, and looking forward to hashing it up with you. And everything's going really well here. I saw the eclipse yesterday for a little bit. I had a friend bring over glasses, and I went through it. But I think I enjoyed more of the reaction online from a lot of people than I did my own personal experience.
Love it, Jeff, and thank you for those kind words. A friend of the pod, indeed. We are happy to have you on this week, and let's start, if we could, with a question about your duties as the FRC president. You've served in the position during an interesting time for both the media and the league. What have been your biggest takeaways since taking on that gig?
Biggest takeaway since taking on that gig? Well, I think you have to start off. I'm trying to think what year it was. So I first started covering the CFL in 2016. Was my first full year as the Bomber beat reporter for the Free Press, and it didn't take very long for me to realize that something needed to change, like almost kind of you talk about like the interesting time. And I think a lot of that has to do with COVID. Well, I feel like really ever since I've been, a professional journalist, which I'd say I graduated from Carleton in 2012 was when I would like to think the years in, but before that, but certainly after that was also a very interesting time where media was starting to push back. Access was starting to decrease. And we've seen that over time, obviously, in, the last amount of years, and we continue to see it. But I noticed in my first year that it's just, and this wasn't, this isn't against my colleagues, but there was almost felt like there was almost an acceptance of like, okay, it's going to be tougher to get access. The locker room is going to be tougher. Who wants the locker room? I remember sitting in an interview, our annual meeting. It was my first Grey Cup as the beat reporter for the Bombers. The Bombers, of course, weren't in it. They weren't heading to the perennial weren't perennial Grey Cup competitors at that point in time. But I was going there just to network and to figure out like kind of the lay of the land. And it was just, there was almost a reluctance to kind of fight back from this. And I saw the CFL as a league that, unlike every other league, needed us just as much, if not more, than we needed them. And so, what I've noticed over the years is, first and foremost, I find that people who cover the Canadian Football League are super passionate. So, I don't like to open up with what seems like a negative. There's a lot of people who care about this league. They've covered this league for a very, very long time. But I think for me, my biggest takeaways in my role has just been, it's been trying to figure out a way to navigate some of these media, obstacles, if you will. And we have faced them in the CFL. We haven't faced them as heavy, in the NHL and the coverage I've done there, but we have faced them. So I think my biggest takeaways are certainly, like, pre-COVID would be just a desire to, to do more, to tell more stories. Certainly, I've noticed the decline in people covering the league. That's been a massive piece of this. And that wasn't just pre-COVID, but especially post-COVID. That would have to be my biggest takeaway there, is navigating what new media looks like, right? I mean, who is it's a question we still ask to this day. Who should be a member of the Football Reporters of Canada? And because it's a league that is unlike every other league, does it offer opportunities for different kinds and different types of media, to the point where, because of the decrease in membership, should we be widening our scope, widening our net to bring people in? So, it's been an interesting job. I feel like my biggest strength in the job is just to not let the CFL pull bullshit. So, like, if someone wants to come at, whether it's the seating chart for Grey Cup, it's just, my goal is, first and foremost, is to move the line in our direction when it comes to this, media wars, if you will. But at the very least, keep that line where it is and not have it move backwards. So I find, the league is a great league to work with. They are, you do have influence and power, in not just in this position, but as reporters covering the league, more so than you would in, again, other leagues, particularly the NHL. But it's really been the changing landscape, which isn't unique to the media, but because of the number of reporters ultimately dropping covering the CFL, that's been the biggest takeaway, is figuring out how to continue to tell that good storytelling, how to give the league the eyeballs that it deserves, and finding out unique and maybe in some cases different ways of finding out who should be that group of people, away from maybe the traditional group of reporters.
Well, Jeff, hey, buddy. I know you and I are obviously, we should let people know that you and I both cover the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, and our CFL beat writers have been for
Might even be friends.
Might even be friends. Occasionally have traveled on the road together and had the occasional pop. But, just to segue from that, the fact is the CFL is a small league. It has players that make a fraction of the money the NFL players make. It has perpetually had to fight through financial challenges, franchise struggles, and even fan apathy that continues to this day. And yet it's an institution in Canada to many Canadians. So what is it for you about the league that makes you enjoy covering it so much?
Oh man, it's honestly, it's the people. Like, it's the, and when I say that, it's a broad term because I use it broadly. It's the fans that have watched the league, for decades, half centuries in some cases. Those people show up every year to the Grey Cup. They bring a certain energy and a certain kind of down to earthness that I think is unique in fan bases. The players, I really enjoy the players, for the most part. They're accessible, they're interesting. This is a league that has a lot of people, as Ted, like a lot of people from the deep South and U.S. with unique stories. You look at it, and I'm not trying to take a shot here, but, like, Andrew Harris is doing Andrew Harris had a great story in his life. Some hardships moving up through, obviously dealing with racism and some things like that, and then excelling at the level that he did at the CFL. It's just, the irony of it all is there's probably about 20 guys in that locker room who have gone through crazier. And so it's to me, it's telling those stories. Just, you show up to a guy, you don't even know him. You do a little bit of a scouting report on him. You go cover him at training camp, and he starts talking about this tattoo on his left arm, and that leads to his relationship with his mother, which leads to this, incredible story of strength and resilience against all odds to be here in Winnipeg right now. And so the storytelling, there really is no shortages of stories. And I extend that to, and I'm not just saying, and this as well, but even the people in the league, the people at the league head office, they care, the teams care, the presidents, the general managers. It is a unique community, and it's one that I've been fortunate enough to penetrate and be able to create relationships. And so, I think that's really it for me is from the professional side. But look, I mentioned that I took over the Bomber beat in 2016. I was that typical, kind of annoying Canadian who wasn't really into the CFL, who was very much into the NFL, who played all the fantasy leagues, who, dedicated hours and hours and hours a year to watching the game. And I was fortunate enough as a kid. My dad was a corporate sponsor of the Bombers. I even got a chance to be the water boy when Jeff Reinbold was rolled up on his motorcycle for that. Those pretty interesting years that he was at the helm of the team. And so I was a Bomber fan as a young kid, but it just kind of got away with me, much like we were talking off about wrestling. It just kind of was not much. It wasn't in my psyche. I never really went to high school games. I had friends that did. And I kind of, I'll be honest with you, sometimes I kind of punched down on the league. I just thought it was lame. I didn't think it was all that interesting. I wasn't going to invest my money. And I'm not just saying this because I cover it. It really is true. If you can get people there, if you can get people watching, I think for me, it really was when I was in university, when I was in Ottawa, I went to Carleton. I didn't have a ton of friends. So like on weekends I was working, or then I started to kind of get into CFL. It was just something to watch. And from that point on, and really when I started covering it, it's just a great game. And I am in that group now that considers the CFL a more enjoyable game to watch than the NFL. I find that, when you look at some of the, you look at this season or any season really in the Canadian Football League, and the way games end and how it's never really out, teams aren't really out, and the comebacks that get mounted, that just doesn't exist in the NFL. And so the writing's on the wall in a lot of cases in the NFL by halftime, third quarter, whereas the CFL, it always seems. That's why they call it the Crazy Football League. I must have written that a million times in my leads because it was so relevant to that situation or that game. And I'm probably the biggest cheerleader when it comes to encouraging friends, family, whomever, who might be, even from a betting perspective. And I'm not even pushing people on the betting side, but if that's going to get you there to just watch the game, I think you're going to enjoy it. Just take my word for it. I'm a guy who used to be all about NFL, and now I'm the president of the Football Reporters of Canada. So certainly it had its impression on me, and it's just an all-around great game. And as I said off the top, just filled with great people as well.
Jeff, I'd like to ask you about your investigative work. Over 3 years ago, you released a 6-part series, for those who don't know, called Unmasking the Graham James Saga, the untold story behind hockey's most notorious sexual predator. Now, much has been written about James over the years. Curious, what was it that started your 3-year deep dive on that project?
Yeah, it's an interesting story. So I think I was annoying my editors because I had just finished. I'd been given the Blue Bombers beat in 2016, as I had mentioned, and I had started to dabble in hockey a little bit. And then a couple of years later, we had a bit of a shift in staff, and we wanted to kind of align people with beats rather, because I had the fortunate task of going from Bombers to Jets and then Jets back to Bombers, and then at this point they decided to kind of streamline things. I would later cover the Jets and the Bombers, go back to that situation after that series. But in the meantime, I was kind of bothering them. It's not that I didn't want to do, amateur stuff. It wasn't that issue. It was, I wanted to sink my teeth into something. I wanted to, they knew I wanted to, they knew the kind of writer I was. They knew the kind of reporter I was. I liked challenges. I wanted some structure, all those things. And so it had been a file that the Free Press had kind of teased a little bit, the Graham James story, because, while many people might know Graham James, it surprises me now how, the generations have gone by. Like, a lot of people don't know who Graham James is. So if you don't know who that is, I would certainly recommend reading my series, but even just Googling the person, right? Graham James, a lot of his abuse, occurred in Swift Current, Calgary, but he's a Winnipeg guy. Right. I mean, he grew up on the East Coast, but he moved. His dad was in the military. Moved into Winnipeg when he was a very young age, and much of his much of the man who he became, the personality, the demons, if you will, were harvested in Winnipeg, and as well as some of the abuse. And just to add on top of that, I grew up in St. James in Winnipeg. It's a small community, and that's the community where Graham James grew up. So there was all these kind of interconnectedness between me and the story. I also played for the St. James Canadians, a team that Graham James, or a minor hockey organization that Graham James, pretty much rose the ranks before he went to junior. And so all that kind of combined, they're like, here's your file. They thought about doing it a couple of years ago. They had a colleague of mine in Paul Wiesek. He kind of took a stab at it. I don't think he wanted to go to the depths that I wanted to. And I don't think that the Winnipeg Free Press thought that I was going to go to the depths that I ended up going to. I think that they were looking for, look, this happened in Winnipeg. He's never really been held accountable. Every place, every time he's had charges come up against him, he's pleaded guilty, which has ultimately prevented a trial from happening. So a lot of the what happened, did anybody know, should have people known, what kind, the consequences to that, a lot of those questions had gone unanswered. And so I really they tossed it on my I said, I'll do this, but I'm going to do it my way. I think they thought I was just going to go to people who were assistant coaches or on the coaching staff of Graham James's various stops throughout hockey and pretty much asked, what did you know? What did you didn't know? Yada, yada. I went much deeper than that, got into, I found another victim, talked to other victims who weren't public. I really, what I'm most proud about is I really dove into the grooming process, because the number one question that I kept getting, and I still get that today, is how could Graham James do this to 16, 17-year-old, 18-year-old men who, they'll say it like this, if they wanted to, you could beat the shit out of him. Well, the reality is it's much deeper than that. It's an entire process, a grooming process that I thought that I did a good job of explaining, and took me 3 years. But, and the funny thing is, COVID was like the saving grace in it all, because they canceled the CFL season. I had done all my research at that point, and I essentially got 9 straight months to just write in that 2020 year. And then the series came out in December of 2020.
Well, it was a tremendous piece, Jeff, and I know how passionate you are about doing the investigative work and doing something in your own community like that. So kudos to you. I'm curious, when you dive into investigative work like that, I'm sure there can be real challenges in terms of the emotion, the empathy, the people's very real heartbreak. So how do you deal with those emotions when you're sometimes asking people to dig up painful old memories?
Yeah, it's not easy. Of course, I think it takes a certain kind of person. Now, I don't think that I, personally looked at myself and was like, oh, I'm just an investigative journalist. I always thought I had that, you know, I had that repertoire, I had that, wherewithal to be that person. But I think for me, Teddy, um, especially my upbringing, like I grew up in not a similar situation to what Graham James envisioned, but an elements of a broken home nonetheless. And so I already kind of had a close spot to that kind of stuff, and just that kind of understanding that you could give people help or give people answers. And I don't think a lot of people had those answers. But on top of that, I also, because of my upbringing, I went to therapy for 10 years, and I advocate for anybody who ever, is ever dealing with something, to talk to people. I took full advantage of that in my late teens to my late 20s. And that really just kind of formed who I was. It made me a much different person. And so I've always understood the importance of releasing any kind of negative energy that you might have. And so I certainly was fortunate for the Graham James series to get feedback and to get support, and more importantly, to get offers from psychologists and psychiatrists across the country who had read my piece and said, hey, if you ever need to, this is obviously heavy stuff, if you ever need to talk about it or whatnot, we'd be available. And it came to about the 10th offer, I would say, before I kind of was like, why am I turning these things down? Like, why am I, especially with my experience in this, in talking to people in therapy in general. And so I was lucky enough to have somebody who was actually in the series sit with me and do sessions once a week for probably about 6 months after that investigation. And it was, I didn't think I needed it at the beginning, or it's not that I didn't think I needed it. Maybe I didn't want to take someone else's time or whatever, but I realized pretty quickly just the value in just talking these things out, because, it's certainly the emotion that, and the obstacles that come with having to talk to people. I mean, I've had a lot of conversations that have ruined people's lives, right? I've had a lot of conversations that have saved people's lives. I've gone through the hardships of, the victim I had mentioned to you, Jay. He ended up overdosing, after I got him into a treatment center, after what seemed like the path to a better life. And so there's obviously dealing with that. And then, of course, there's just things that I think, there's the stresses of doing investigative journalism. There's a reason why that not everybody does investigative journalism. And that's because it takes a toll on you. It takes a lot on you. I mean, we have, I don't, I truly believe sports reporters work their asses off. They absolutely do. There's no doubt about it. But there's a different strength, there's a difference to doing that type of work, and the hours you put into that versus doing investigative work, and the pressure that's on it. There's the pressure that you put on yourself. There's the pressure you feel from the people that are trusting you to tell their story. You want to do a good job. So there's all these like external and internal pressures that go into it, that it's, and now learning from this experience, going through, hashing it out with a therapist afterwards. I now do that for all my investigations, big or small. They don't last 6 months. They, sometimes last just a few sessions, but I've been fortunate enough from work to be able to do a handful of investigations since then. I'm currently doing one that's going to come out in a couple months that I'm going to be really proud of. And so it is a little bit of a self-care. There's a reason why I don't have kids, to a certain degree. I'm not married. So like I am really married to my work. And, but yeah, it's certainly anyone who's looking to get involved in that kind of work, certainly you should be taking some time to yourself, and ensuring that, yes, you're doing important work, but you're also doing important work on yourself so that you don't feel the full effects of some of the content that you're covering.
Jeff, you talked a little bit about this in your answer there, but I'm curious how your news work and your investigative work in those duties have strengthened your skill set when it comes to your sports journalism and your Blue Bombers coverage, for example.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and I would say it's certainly made me a better reporter. It's redefined, Greg, what exactly a tough question is. So when you have to ask, when you have to call somebody out of the blue and essentially inform them that of something they did that's going to change the rest of their life, and people in and around their lives as well. You don't really feel the pressure of asking how, why a crappy power play didn't pan out, or what happened in the second period or third period. And so I think what advantage it gives me too, and this speaks to a bit of the media world as well. Like, I'm not naive to think there aren't, people in high places that can affect our jobs, right? Affect, where we work, who we cover. I mean, I think independent papers definitely have a leg up on broadcast partners, TV and radio broadcast partners, because they definitely, like, you definitely need to be careful of what you say and do when you have those kind of partnerships. But I think for me, it's kind of been like, this is the work I love doing. This is the work that's most meaningful for me. So I don't feel that risk of losing anything if I lose the sports beat. So it almost empowers me every time I go out, knowing that if for some reason the Jets don't want to talk to me because I'm being, critical, or the Bombers don't want to talk to me because I'm being critical, or, I brought up this story or whatever, I just don't give a shit. Like, I just, it's just, I act as a professional. I don't take this empowerment and abuse it. I just do my job, what I think is, the importance of the job. And I ask, the tough questions if that's what it requires. And yeah, it's just kind of, it's, if anything, it's around, and I know I've been, giving long answers here, but if it's anything, it's just changed my perspective on things. And changing your perspective on things can do just that. It can empower you, make you feel not, I'm never nervous in front of a millionaire hockey player or any other team or sport. I've never really felt starstruck ever. And it's just because I see some of the real life in the other work, and it's and the challenges. And I'd be lying to say if some of those people who I've fought for aren't in the back of my mind when I'm asking a question that may seem, more difficult in the sports scene. I have them behind me, knowing that this is what journalism is. And if you have a problem with it, well, we can talk about it off air.
Jeff, you work for one of the few newspapers in this country that still sends sports reporters on the road for games and assignments, still makes time for something like you did with that huge project. Your paper is regularly hiring and still has a full and vibrant newsroom in a time when so many things have gone by the wayside all across this continent, so many of those things. How has the Free Press managed to remain this throwback to bygone days of the industry?
Geez, I don't know. Like, I think it's certainly strong ownership, strong leadership, of course. I mean, I think one of the biggest problems, obviously, in the news industry, particularly when it comes to newspapers, is, it's the person at the top sets the tone. If they believe in strong journalism, if they believe in investing in journalism in that respect, then those are strong values, and they're values that a lot of journalists would obviously agree with. So um to answer your question, I have no idea. Maybe it's I got to give it, obviously got to give credit to the readers. They're subscribing. We've been a subscription based model for seemingly forever now. So we kind of, we're not again, we're not steering away from advertising money, but we recognize that advertising money is essentially bottomed out. And so, and I feel like we do a lot of community engaged stuff. So I got to give credit to a lot of the people who kind of, we have different ways now to provide added value or to make the community feel like they're part of it, right? Part of what we do. But yeah, very fortunate, of course. I mean, as you mentioned, Teddy, it's like a throwback. We have a book section. We have, a wine and spirits critic. We have we have people dedicated to features. We have an incredible passages section that is a massive draw to us, where we highlight a different person for the Saturday paper, and people just love that part. So it is nice to see some of the traditional values of newspapers still being cared for by the readership, or still being important to the readership. But at the same time, it's just the industry that we're in. We can't rest on our laurels. I think we're going to have to continue to provide in-depth journalism, provide investigative journalism, continue to do the road trips, hopefully, and essentially don't take it for granted. Make sure that you're making full value out of it. And but yeah, the secret sauce, I don't know, man, but I wish I could sprinkle it on a bunch of other places around the country.
Jeff, I'm in Newmarket, Ontario today, just north of Toronto. And Toronto, of course, one of those markets where you have a fair bit of competition. I cover the Blue Jays, so the Globe and Mail's down there, the Toronto Star, Toronto Sun, et cetera, et cetera. Still some solid competition there, but it doesn't seem as intense as it was back in the day, and perhaps that's due to TSN, Sportsnet. There's just more online competition. But I'm curious to get your thoughts on what it's like in Winnipeg right now, and the competition between the Free Press and the Winnipeg Sun.
Yeah, it's fun. I mean, it is a competition. Back to my point about taking things for granted. I mean, you can't take things for granted. Look at the CFL as a perfect example, because the way Post Media has gone and has purchased a bunch of papers. There's no longer two paper towns anymore. So when you go to practice, more often than not, it's just one guy. And while I'd like to think, and I'm not saying anybody who's in this situation does it, I'd like to think personally that I would take my job just as seriously if I knew that nobody else, paper wise, was competing with me. It definitely forces me to, forces me to, if Ted's on the beat, or one of his colleagues from the Sun, or vice versa, the Free Press, like, you're all, it's a healthy competition. Like, I'm not letting air out of Teddy's tires on the way home from practice so that he doesn't get home and files. And we are all friends, so that's also the other part that's good about it. But it does up your game, and it still puts that fire in you a little bit to get kind of scoops. Like, if you're just the one person, it's almost kind of like they're going to you. If you're the one person, they need you, so they're gonna, whatever. Whereas, you see a guy leave practice and you go, what the heck is he up to? What's his plan? Or why is he talking to Kyle Walters over there? Why is he doing, whatever, so on and so forth. But and so I think that it does bring that. And then there's times and this harkens back to the old days, back when there was no internet, where it's like you'd wake up and you'd read the other person's story and you wonder how they interpret it, or what they got, or whatever. There's still an element of that. Now you don't have to wait for the morning anymore. You can get it online usually later that evening, but you still get to compare yourself. And I'm a big learner, and I'd say that of any students that are watching this show, the moment you stop learning is the moment your career's over. So it's to me, like, I'll read Teddy, the next morning I'll be like, I really like how he transitioned that, or I really like how, he took that part of the scrum, because we're, in a lot of cases we're part of the same scrum. So how did he interpret that? How did he decide to lead that? I'm still a nerd like that. I still enjoy the process. So to be able to kind of have that, competition in this city, to still be able to read that, is a really cool thing. And like I said, it's the other part of it too. Back when we were kind of boat traveling, it gets kind of lonely without that other person. So it's made for some awesome trips in the past, and certainly some funny stories and times of practice.
Yeah, we've been lucky enough, Jeff, to get to experience pretty much every big city in Canada through the CFL. And I mean, we know all the best breakfast places. We know all the best dinner places. We know where to go for a late night beer, maybe some music, maybe some karaoke. You never know what you're going to get.
Maybe
But
some other categories there too.
that's a big part of the allure of it. But I kind of agree with you that the competition, even though it is a friendly competition, it used to be way different. I mean, there was guys that worked at the Free Press in the before you and some of the other of your colleagues right now, who are much more secretive, absolutely would not even speak to you because of the fact that you might somehow get their idea out of them, and would stand on the other side of the room, so that there was really no association whatsoever. But I think it's friendly, and I think it's a competition, and I think it's important. I think it works both ways. It works for us because I go to practice every single day saying, I want to make sure I'm at least as good as what Jeff or the other people from the Free Press is doing, and hopefully better. I mean, that is just the truth. And an interesting thing, Jeff, is that you and I both have had opportunities to cover the Winnipeg Jets and be on the road and on the beat on that at the same time as well. And I haven't even asked you, we haven't asked you any questions about current sports. So I want to just get your thoughts on that team right now. They're heading into the playoffs. I think 5 games left as we speak. Still have a chance to get second place, maybe home ice advantage in the playoffs. Could also finish in third and not have a home ice advantage. Do you see this Winnipeg Jets team as one that can more likely make a deep run, or more likely flame out quickly in the playoffs?
Well, I think, the answer to that question is based strictly on circumstance. Like, I think the Winnipeg Jets are a good team. I think they've shown that this season. But when you look at what they're staring down right now, a first round matchup with the Colorado Avalanche, and will likely probably be third, still potential for those two teams to switch second and third in the Central, and obviously earn that home ice advantage. But I just, I look at it like the Toronto Maple Leafs for years, right? Having to play, being in a tough division, and having to play the likes of like the Boston Bruins in the first round. I mean, and the thing is I don't, this is a little off topic. I don't buy into that whole like, oh, those teams should be playing in the final. Well, go look at the other round matchups. You could probably say half a dozen of them are potential Stanley Cup finals even. So, but the Jets, since I have to answer the question, I think they're more likely to bow out of the first round than go on a deep run. Now, anything's possible in the playoffs. We certainly saw that with Florida last season, knocking off Boston in the first round after being in a pretty big hole to start off. So anything, I guess, is possible. The problem is we just haven't seen it from Winnipeg, and we just haven't seen it consistently. And I think one of the biggest issues is it's this time of year where I don't know if the light gets too bright, the stage gets too big, but the Winnipeg Jets just don't seem to find whatever it is they need to find at this point, to look like a team where I'm saying to you confidently that I could see this team going deep. And whether it's, I know they're on a 3-game win streak, but that came after a 6-game losing streak, and really the schedule for the Winnipeg Jets since after Christmas, go look at it. It's easy. Like, it's not a difficult schedule. So, they were able to maintain their place in the Central because of their competition. When they finally got hit with a few more teams that were, playoff bound, life became a bit of a struggle. And that's what this week's going to be all about. To have to play Nashville, Dallas, and Colorado this week, I think we're going to learn a lot about the Winnipeg Jets, and perhaps how they do this week might change my opinion. But as of now, I just, again, anything can happen. Connor Hellebuck needs to be a beast. He needs to be the leader. He needs to steal that series. But outside of that, I don't predict the Jets going very far if they got to play the Avs in the first round.
Jeff, I'd like to ask you one last one about the CFL. And here in the Toronto market, you've got the Maple Leafs, obviously King, the Blue Jays right up there, the Raptors, Toronto FC, I would say the Major League Soccer team is above the Argonauts when it comes to the sporting depth chart, just my casual viewings of the GTA. Is there an easy fix to the Toronto situation? They cannot seem to draw down at BMO Field. It's a much better football experience than, of course, the Dome. But just butts and seats have been an issue. Is there a fix?
Greg, go back to my earlier comment. If I had the answer to that, I'd be the commissioner of the Canadian Football League. Like if I had that answer for them, I'd be meeting with MLSE privately and selling it to them for lots of money. Look, there is, I tend to believe those who say there is a, perhaps smaller but engaged fan base there. I mean, you do see it at games. You look at the stands and you go, yeah, okay, it's not that many fans, but it's still fairly loud. And so I think that speaks to the people who are showing up. The issue, of course, is to get more people to show up. And it's just, and maybe it starts there, right? Maybe it's an issue with MLSE and the ownership group, adding them, pretending like they're part of the family and not the ugly stepchild that they don't pay attention to. Because if you look at the banners on their things, they don't even have the Argos as a logo on their stuff. They have everybody else that you mentioned. So even they aren't, seeing this team as, or they're seeing this team as hurting their brand. Now, on the flip side of that, it's great to have MLSE as an ownership group because of their deep pockets, because of their other successful properties, that it allows them to lose their lunch money. I think, as I heard Cy say on a couple interviews ago, right? They've accepted that. So you need that ownership, because if you're looking for ownership all of a sudden, then who's going to want to take over and take that on? So it's a bit of a double-edged sword. You just wish they were doing more with it. I don't know what the quick fix is. I don't know if there is a quick fix. I don't know what people in Toronto, whether the sports market is just oversaturated, whether it's not something that people want to do in the summer, if there needs to be a better effort. I know there has been efforts in the past to do, tailgating before the games, to bring some kind of social event prior to kickoff. So it's, I don't, it's not like they've done nothing. But it's a tough spot. Where they still are big assets is TV numbers. So the TV numbers are still pretty decent. They still draw a fair amount of eyeballs, which is obviously important in other avenues of revenue. But I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's trying to make things cool in Toronto, if they got to go to a smaller venue and make it like more exclusive and a little bit more intimate or whatever. But it's been something they've trying to do for quite some time, and just don't seem to have the answers. That being said, they are moving in the right direction. This past year has been good. I mean, the chatter wasn't, the chatter was kind of the Alberta teams this year at Grey Cup, and it wasn't the BC, wasn't Toronto, wasn't Montreal. It was what's going on in Alberta, right? So they are trending, in the right direction. But even when you compare them to those two other teams, they're still, when you rank them 1 to 9, they're still at the bottom. So, I think there is something to be said about their growth right now. And, unfortunately for them, I don't know if Chad Kelly is going to be playing in the CFL next year. I don't know how that's even possible. But here we are. He's still on the team. They're still going through this process, but that certainly doesn't help. But, they were a good team last year at 16-2. And maybe if you continue to be successful on the field, maybe that continues to grow off it.
I think we were going to ask you about the CFL's long-term viability, Jeff, and I think you pretty much answered it there. I guess, it is interesting because you pointed that out. Things were so much better in BC this year. Toronto had a great season on the field, didn't get there to the Grey Cup. Montreal went from basically not knowing who their owner was going to be and selling off their players to winning the Grey Cup within 1 year. Another beauty of the crazy football league, isn't it? That something like that could happen. It's very strong in Winnipeg. It's still very strong in Saskatchewan, Hamilton. Ottawa's slipped a little bit, but I think if you get them a bit better team, they'll be okay. And then, as you said, Calgary and Edmonton are an issue, but I don't feel like that's completely going off the rails. You should be able to bounce it back there. The stadium is an issue in Calgary. There's no doubt about it. And I don't know how easily that gets fixed. But I guess the real question here is, where do you see this league in 10 years? Is it still just chugging along as it is now, or do you think there's going to have to be some seismic change for things to keep working?
I don't think they can keep chugging along as is. I do think that things need to happen. I think the CFL could do. I'm this believer. I think they could do a little bit of a full circle and become cool again, because I do like the the Canadiana to it. I do like the accessibility to it. I've been hearing these rumblings. I have absolutely no specifics, but I've been hearing this rumbling that the CFL is going to announce something soon. That's going to be pretty significant to their business. Now, I've heard that before, and that's come and gone, and the business has remained the business. But I don't know what it's associated with, so kind of a lame drop here, but I do think they are finding, looking for ways outside of the box. I think there's going to be some potential here with the betting. There's potential with U.S. contracts. I think there's potential with streaming abilities here as they move into the future. They have their relationship with TSM. We'll see how, if that can be maintained or if that can be changed or whatever it could be. I think there's opportunity out there with betting and with streaming services to help at the very least keep their heads above water and continue to go on. I don't see the CFL packing their bags and leaving anytime soon, but they are going to have to find ways to reinvent themselves, to bring in new audiences, because like newspapers, you have that established older audience. What do you need to do now to bring in some young viewers to make them excited about the game, and then ultimately inspire their kids to grow, right? That's there's almost a full generation there that was almost skipped between my parents and the next one. My age group is still kind of clinging on, but it hasn't really dripped to the younger fan base. So I think that's certainly where you need to. That's certainly what they've been going with, but they certainly need to be continuing to trend in that area if this league is gonna thrive and not just survive.
I would just point anyone in the 18 to 25 crowd to just go to a Winnipeg Blue Bombers game on a July Friday night and hang out at the Rum Hut and tell me they're not having a good time, because it sure looks like people are. And if they could spread that around the league, that would be a pretty big move for the league overall. Jeff, I want to thank you, first of all, for being a loyal listener of the Riser. I've always appreciated your input on it, and it's really great to know that somebody is appreciating what we're doing here. And of course, I really want to thank you, and also I'm sure Greg does, for joining us here on the Riser. And hopefully, this will not be the last time we have you as a guest, because fantastic insight, my friend.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, guys. Anytime. I love hashing this up. I also appreciated Greg introducing me as an investigative journalist first, ahead of a sports journalist. An investigative journalist who also does some sports. That was a nice, refreshing twist on what my usual introductions are for these shows. So that was it's lots of fun, guys. Always a big fan. Keep doing what you're doing. It's bringing a lot of value to people like me and us out there.
A friend of the pod, Jeff Hamilton. Thank you, man.
You got it.
Well, what a great conversation that was with our friend and colleague, Jeff Hamilton, who certainly has a lot of passion for the sports industry and for sports writing and for sports themselves, and was able to share a lot of that with us. Greg, what were your takeaways from what Jeff had to say? I think he's kind of from a bit of a younger generation than us, a younger generation of journalists, but he really has been through a lot of the changes already in the industry, and kind of has that finger on the pulse of where it's been and where it's going.
Well, I mean, he just has a tremendous skill set, right? Like so many of our previous guests here on the Riser, we've talked to columnists, reporters, just pure writers, like a nice mix. And Jeff is a really interesting one with his great sports writing background, but then also all that investigative work. And it's so interesting to me to really go into the weeds on his process and how he tackles those big investigative features that require so many months of time. I mean, that was the other interesting thing to me. 3 years on that James story, and then he's got something on the go now that has taken several months too. So fantastic that he really throws himself into his work like that, and the results are just excellent. So kudos to Jeff for that, and great to have him on. Let's move on to hot topics, Teddy. It's that time, and as always, we enjoy a little curling discussion. And Brad Guzzu with another silver medal at the World Championship, falling to Sweden's Niklas Edin in the final. What are your takeaways from that championship in Schaffhausen, Switzerland, Teddy?
Yeah, I paid real close attention to it, and you're just looking for how does Brad Gushue just get that final edge, because he'd already won, or he'd already taken home silver medals from the previous two world championships, and he talked before he went over to Schaffhausen how you can't put too much on a team if it doesn't succeed when it gets to a one game final and just isn't able to come away with the win. And that's exactly what happened to them. Niklas Edin had to make a heck of a draw with his last rock in the 10th end against three to edge out Team Gushue by inches and win that championship. So, it's disappointing, I think, for Canada. I think it's disappointing for Gushue that he didn't get the win, obviously, but I think they have to have their heads held high. They certainly put in an excellent performance. They looked like a team that can win. It gives, I think, those fans that worry about Canada not winning very many world championships, not winning at the Olympics lately, hope that it certainly can, because if you get into those one game situations, anything can happen. And I think the odds of him losing three in a row are already pretty long. I don't see it happening again. He's going to win one of these times if he gets that close. A lot of curlers talk about it. He even used a Jack Nicklaus reference where he said, if you put yourself into the back nine with a chance, you've got a chance to win the Masters. Maybe somebody will, make a mistake and you can get past them, or you might have a great final 9 holes and you win. At least you're giving yourself a chance. And I think that's what he was looking for going there. And I think that's what he got. And overall, great year for Canada. I think in curling, Rachel Homan finally burst that bubble and got Canada back onto the World Championship podium. In women's curling, she had one of the greatest seasons in the history of curling. And, I think overall, it looks like things are on an upward trend for Canada. And that's what you want with the Olympics coming right around the corner.
I think the thing with Brad Gushue is he's won everything there is to win. And another world silver to me is there will be no heads hung low as a result of that second place finish in Switzerland. To me, I think the big goal, obviously, for him and everyone else in the elite curling world is the Olympics. And what a storyline that would be in 2026, Ted, to have Team Gushue represent Canada at the Winter Olympics 20 years after he won gold in Turin, Italy. Well, Pinerolo, I guess. His first Olympic title. And of course, he was back at the 2022 games. Couldn't get to the top of the podium for that. And he wants it in less than 2 years from now. So it'll be interesting to see how the rest of this quad shakes out and see who represents Canada at the Winter Games. But some interesting curling news, Ted, actually, as we record this podcast, and we'll just touch on it briefly. The Curling Group, a new outfit called the Curling Group, has acquired ownership of the Grand Slam of Curling. Now, I just briefly scanned the news release here. Interesting story. Basically, the Curling Group's going to assume ownership and operations of the Grand Slam of Curling series after this season. And of course, the Players' Championship underway in Toronto. That puts a bow on the Slam season. Ted, I'm wondering, when we look big picture at the Grand Slam of Curling series, what do you make of the 5-event circuit, and where do you think it needs to go?
Well, obviously, there are people out there that think it needs to go somewhere. And, because this transaction is happening, and some of the people involved in that curling group are John Morris, Jennifer Jones, Jared Allen, the former NFL player who's become a curler out of the United States. I mean, I think, you and I discussed this a little bit off camera, and it does seem like the idea here is to maybe make it a little bit more international than it is, because all the Grand Slams are currently played in Canada, even though there are a lot of international teams involved. I'll tell you, the Grand Slams have never moved the needle as much for me as they probably should. I mean, they've done a great job of getting that series off the ground. And I remember when teams actually had to boycott Curling Canada and Curling Canada events in order to get their Grand Slam series working. And we're able to do it. I mean, you look at Kevin Martin and some of the people that sacrificed way back when, sacrificed opportunities to win the Brier, to be a part of the new, of this new circuit. And they've grown it into something big, and Sportsnet shows it a lot. I feel like, in a way, Greg, there's a little bit too much saturation of the big event curling because of the Grand Slam season. They knocked it down to only 5 events this year as opposed to 6 in the past. But when you combine that with the Scotties and the Brier and 2 World Championships, over a 3 or 4 month period, you're talking about almost every weekend, or at least every second weekend, there being a major event on. And I'm just not sure. I know it's great for the game itself, but I'm not sure in terms of moving the needle with fans if that's not a bit too much. But I think it's important that it's being purchased here by a curling group that wants to manage it in a slightly different way. It was owned by Sportsnet itself. Sportsnet's going to still continue to televise it, my understanding is, and that it seems like the kind of thing that can only be good for the growth of the Grand Slam, and the growth of the Grand Slam means the growth of curling, and the growth of curling in terms of slams is more money, most likely, for the high level curlers. And this is the only way that they're possibly going to be able to compete as high level teams, because they need to be able to have that opportunity to make somewhat of a living at it. So it's going to be very interesting to see where it goes from here. I think you've actually covered a little bit more Grand Slam curling than I have over the years. Do you see this as being a big step forward? I know we're in the infancy of knowing what it's all about. It doesn't sound like some sort of desperate move that needed to happen. It seems more like something that's really, a curling group that's investing in the future of curling.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing. I mean, this to me is a sport with an incredible amount of potential. And if you could ever get it out of its little bubble and really grow it, I mean, I think the potential's off the charts, especially when we look at some of the international markets and their passion for curling. And I'm talking about South Korea and Japan. I mean, the Asian market as a whole, they love it. And so if you could ever tap into that, oh, the potential is there, certainly. But there are some big picture questions, I think, when it comes to the sport. And we've talked about this in the past. One is the curling calendar. And we're looking at a world championship that just wrapped up in Switzerland on a Sunday afternoon. Then the curlers, they have to fly back to North America in 48 hours later? They're competing at the Players Championship. I think Guju and Nadine are playing tonight again. So it's like, I mean, that is a quick turnaround for the men's world competitors who were at that event. And to ask them to be in peak form for the season ending slam, that's a big ask. And I think Bruce Mouat actually I think it was Bruce Mouat he won the world title last year and then had a really poor performance at the slam shortly thereafter. And I mean, you're going to have that. So if you could ever get the calendar sorted, that would be interesting. Do they keep it at 5 events? That's also an interesting question. And where do you play those events? Obviously, they have looked at going outside of Canada for the first time, and they were close to Las Vegas. I think the pandemic put the kibosh on that. But I know that they've had initial thoughts in years past about possibly taking it to other markets and even looking at getting one to Asia. But of course, it's going to be heavy lifting. But are we at that point where the Grand Slam of curling circuit and so-called pro curling, can it get to that golf level where you can take it around just like you do golf tournaments and play them in these markets that are really hot for the product? That would be good too. The big thing for me, just as I've covered a few slams over the years, they do have that butts in seats problem in some markets. I was down in Oakville where they had the slam there in previous seasons, and attendance was an issue. The Toronto one that is ongoing this week, well attended usually, and I would expect nothing less this week with Team Jennifer Jones's farewell, and of course so many great storylines, Rachel Homan's season, et cetera, et cetera. That's going to be a great event. But some of the other events on the circuit have been spotty when it comes to attendance. So where do you put these events? I think you need to focus on the curling hotbeds, and then maybe now's the time to strike and really get down in the United States and see where you can take this series. So I think it's exciting news, and I'm intrigued about where things go from here on that one. Let's transition and what's next on our hot topics list? Ted, you want to go with NHL or Blue Jays?
Let's go with NHL. let's talk NHL.
Well, playoffs around the corner. 4 Canadian NHL teams, looks like. Just a matter of figuring out the matchups. Let's start with the Winnipeg Jets, Teddy. Some losing streaks, some surges up the standings, some petering. Like, who knows what you're going to get with this Jets team? Where do you think this team goes when it does start its postseason?
um, I wanted to just make the precursor that I'm not sure 4 Canadian teams in the playoffs is actually what the NHL wants, because I'm not so sure that those are the greatest possibilities for ratings matchups for the NHL. But I'm glad to see that these Canadian teams are pushing. 4 out of 7 isn't bad, and 4 out of 16 overall certainly means there's a chance, isn't there? There's a chance that Canada might finally end that drought that goes all the way back to 1993. You got 7 teams all the way back to 1993. It really is about time. Which one of those teams is going to do it? I don't know. And I mean, is it going to be the Winnipeg Jets? Well, I doubt it. I don't think they've got quite that makeup of a Stanley Cup team. Maybe they do somewhat on paper, but I'm just not sure if they do mentally, because you see these sort of lapses from this team that make you go, one day you're saying that's perfect structure. That's they've got this incredible goaltender. They've got these fantastic skating defensemen. They've got great depth. They've got the 4 excellent lines. They've got a first line center in Mark Scheifele and a second line center in Sean Monahan. They've got, I think, every single forward in their top 12 has at least 10 goals. Like, they have done the kinds of things that you need to prove that you're a good team. And yet they have these bizarre lapses that make you just wonder, where did it all go? Why can't that group play the way that it knows how to play and the way that it's proven it can play? Now, the question just becomes, can they harness that when the playoffs actually start? And, that is what remains to be seen. It looks like they're going to play the Colorado Avalanche in the first round. And that's a team that everyone seems to, a lot of the people predicting say that's a real tough matchup for Winnipeg. But I think any matchup in the West would be tough. And the Jets have only played Colorado twice this year, and they won both games. So I'm not sure that I do buy that. I think getting home ice advantage would mean a lot for them, because if you can put Adam Lowry, one of the best defensive centers in the league, on Nathan McKinnon regularly, you've got a better chance. In 4 of the games, if you've got the matchup that you're looking for, you've got a better chance. And so I really look at them as one of many teams right now, and this may sound like somewhat wishy-washy, but it's just the way it is when you look at these NHL standings. I'd say they're one of many teams right now that could just as easily go out pretty easily in 4 or 5 games as make a deep run into the 3rd round, because they have that makeup, and yet you can see that there might be some cracks in their armor. And I mean, look at the West. You've got Dallas, which is unbelievable. Edmonton's been incredible for the longest time. Vancouver's had a fantastic season. Colorado's really good. Vegas is in 8th place right now, and they're adding Mark Stone and Thomas Hertl for the playoffs. Isn't that convenient? and even the Los Angeles Kings and Nashville Predators are good teams. Any one of those teams can win this. Any one of those teams could make it to the Stanley Cup final, in my opinion. West is stronger than the East right now. There's going to be one lower ranked team in the East that I don't think should be a real contender. But man, it is going to be, I think, one of the most interesting first rounds of the playoffs that we've ever seen.
4 solid Canadian NHL teams in the postseason. I've said it before, Teddy. I think it all comes down to a hot goalie. And I think for that reason, you have to like the Jets. Connor Hellebuck is an all-world netminder. He can get rolling, get hot, look out. But if I had to bet, if I had to throw down a few bucks, how do you bet against the Edmonton Oilers? I mean, they're going to win some 7-6 games, but with Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, that kind of offensive firepower, Zach Hyman, I mean, go down the list. I really see them as being the Canadian NHL team to go deep. But how has it been 31 years since a Canadian NHL team has raised Lord Stanley's mug in the air? That seems, we're going back to Patrick Waugh, right? 93?
There's been a few finals in there, right?
Yeah, oh, sure. Canucks came close in 11.
Ottawa, Montreal. They've all been to the final, but none of them have been able to win it. And I want to say though about when it comes to Connor Hellebuck, I like Connor Hellebuck. I think he's an excellent goalie. He's probably going to win the Vezina Trophy this year, and rightly so. The Jets are one of the best defensive teams or best goals against teams in the entire league. He hasn't proven it in the playoffs yet, in my opinion.
Right.
People keep saying he's going to steal wins for them. Well, he hasn't done it yet in the playoffs, and so that is something to me that is going to be paramount. If he is that goalie that can steal a series, if he's Carey Price from 2021, then maybe you've got a chance to make a deep run. Montreal made it as the 18th ranked team. They made it to the final. Well, they had Carey Price in goal. That makes a big difference. But you got to be that guy, and I'd like to see him prove that. And again, the Winnipeg Jets have that opportunity because they have such a good goalie. Vancouver Canucks have Thatcher Demko. That's another guy that could lead a team a long way. The jury's out on Stuart Skinner in Edmonton, and obviously Edmonton has all this talent, but can Stuart Skinner be that guy that can really backstop a team, not give up the occasional bad goal? That's the question mark for them. And so again, like these teams, no matter how well you do in the regular season, it's just going to come down to really putting it together at the right time against a team that's basically just as good as you. It just makes for great entertainment in that first round, in my opinion.
Ted, as you know, I'm just north of Toronto, and talk about not getting it done in the playoffs. Look no further than the blue and white, who could crush it in the regular season, score your 65 goals at Austin Matthews. But what are you doing for me in the postseason? This is what the Maple Leaf Nation really wants an answer for, and we'll see if this year's team can finally get it done. I was looking at the stat when they clinched. I think this is their 8th year in a row in the playoffs, and they've won one round, I think, in that time. So, it's time. I think this is the year, right? I mean, there's got to be a deep Canadian playoff run. Before I forget, Teddy, for those who are watching this podcast in video form, I had to change locations here. I'm back in the office. The dog was going bonkers down the hallway, so we've had to make a change. But
you started talking about curling, and the dog went bonkers.
Oh, and I just had one more curling thought. When you were chiming in on the NHL, I was thinking about our Grand Slam chat. How does that series, just to put a bow on that, how does the series not start airing the content until day 3 of the competition? Like, to me, this is like a golf tournament. You're starting it on the 8th hole. I know that there are probably issues with, you got to pay the guys, you got to get the trucks out there. It's like a thing with overtime, but surely this new group, I think if you're going to make a change on that circuit, you have to air all of the draws like you would at the other major curling events on the calendar. I think that would go a long way. It's a tremendous televised product. We just need to see it. And like today's a great example. Jennifer Jones is playing. It's her final event as a 4-player team, and we can't see it. So I think that'd be a great place to start. It'll be one of my first questions if I get John Morris on the phone here later today. We'll see.
That's one of the things that I was thinking about. In my opinion, it's oversaturation. I'm not sure you do need more TV, but then we're allowed to disagree on the occasional thing. So, and I wanted to point out that I have one distinction about all the people who have appeared on this podcast today. Yourself, our producer, Alex, Jeff Hamilton. I was actually alive the last time the Leafs won a cup. I was born in 66 and they won in 67. So there you go.
Yeah. Speaking of droughts, 67. How many years has it been? Yeah, 56.
Yeah, it's been a while. Greg, let's switch over to another Toronto team. The Blue Jays had their home opener and they unveiled the new look Rogers Center. You were there. What were your takeaways from that?
Yeah, I was there last night for opening night. Jays home opener. Of course, they started the season with a 10-game road trip, while the finishing touches were put on the latest round of renovations at Rogers Center. And it certainly does look more like a quote unquote ballpark now. One of the big complaints over the years is that you'd be sitting, say, by the left field foul pole, and you're looking out at center field, because this is a facility that was originally built as a multi-use sports facility. The Argonauts played there for many years. They've had other events, concerts, et cetera, et cetera. Now it's more of a baseball focus. They still will have the odd concert in there. Taylor Swift, I think, is in town in November. But now the seats are actually facing the infield, facing the action. So that was certainly a welcome addition. And of course, fans are very excited about cup holders. All those years, you got to put your cold pint by your feet and hope it doesn't get knocked over. Now they've got proper cup holders on those 100 level seats. So all in, I think the fans are, and the players certainly were very excited about the additions. A $400 million round of renovations, according to the team. They had us in for the tour, and it looks great. I think it looks, if you haven't seen it, it looks a little bit like Yankee Stadium from behind with the seating structure, the colors, that vibe. And you certainly notice a change in the corners. The padded walls go up much higher now. So interesting. We had a couple balls knocked down in there last night, and it's interesting to see how those corners play. Challenging for the third base coach too. You got to look down the line, and there's a lot more wall there, a lot less foul territory. So some interesting changes at the park. As for my early takeaways, Teddy, the Blue Jays won last night, the series opener against the Seattle Mariners. They're 5-6 on the season. A lot of complaints in the early going that this is the same team, and of course, all off season. Remember the Shohei Ohtani pursuit? It's essentially a front office that stood pat and ran it back with a very similar roster. And the early returns have not been great. Same old thing. The offense, so-so. Pitching and defense have been pretty good, but the bats just have not been going. And my one takeaway from last night, when I was like a little surprised by, were the boos. There were some boos during the player introductions. There were some boos when John Schneider came out to pull Jose Barrios. And for listeners who follow the Blue Jays closely, it was the Blue Jays fans' first opportunity to have their voices heard in that setting since Schneider pulled Barrios in the fourth inning of Game 2. And clearly his most criticized decision as Blue Jays skipper, pulled him in the fourth inning. The Blue Jays went on to lose. His reliever, Yusei Kikuchi, who came on that day, gave up 2 quick runs, and the Blue Jays just could not get the bats going. And so, yes, very surprising to hear boos during the player inch. The hitting coach got booed a little bit. Schneider got booed a little bit. Interesting. So we'll see if this fan base has had enough of the Jays' current ways. Did you happen to watch the game last night, Teddy?
I didn't catch that one. I've seen most of the games this year, though, and what they say, the old adage is that people dig the long ball, right? And they like offense, and that's not been there most of the time for the Jays. A couple of games there where they just, they just did nothing. They just did nothing. And I think you can understand why people would be a little bit perturbed by that. They got so worked up and excited that they were going to add a big bat at one point, maybe the biggest of bats in Shohei Ohtani, or at least some other bats that were going to make what was a punchless offense have a little bit more gusto to it, and it didn't happen. So you can understand a little bit of frustration, but it's awfully early in the season for that, so it is a little surprising. Like you said, first chance to let their voices be heard, and they did so. So hey, what it tells me is if they keep hitting like Pop Warner levels and scoring very little, they're probably not going to have the most enjoyable relationship with their fans all season.
To be fair, they did add Justin Turner in the offseason, a proven playoff performer and a quality slugger, if you will. And he's been great in the early going, and he was certainly a big part of the offense last night. So Turner has done his part so far. We'll see if the rest of the team gets it together. They can get back to the 500 mark tonight with a victory. So there you go. Ted, I wanted to ask you about March Madness, and we touched on it last week. Caitlin Clark. I mean, I think the March Madness for me has been more focused on the women's basketball than the men's. First time that's happened for me. And the numbers have been through the roof for Caitlin Clark and the entire women's basketball tournament. What did you make of this change when it comes to U.S. college basketball?
Well, I watched both finals, and I'll tell you which one was a lot more interesting. That was the one from on the women's side, and honestly, the semifinal where Iowa won over UConn was incredible. Caitlin Clark just you know, she's like, I heard people compare her to Gretzky. I mean, she's still in college, but I mean, what a star she's going to be in this sport for so many years to come. And it's really been a phenomenon, like you said, incredible crowds, incredible ratings. I mean, what was it, 18.5 million? That's just unheard of. I read somewhere that like a Stanley Cup Finals game in the US drew something like 2.7 million. I mean, my God, like this is not even in the same league. So what an incredible story that is. And then of course UConn wins its second straight on the men's side and beats Purdue in a rout. And again, I think because that game was a rout, you're kind of looking at the women's tournament again and saying, wow, that was more exciting on the whole. That had a whole lot of intrigue to it, and it had that superstardom and all the things that you're looking for. So we said this last week, and it doesn't change. I think we've been strong supporters of women's sports on the riser to this point, and I think it's with very good reason. Women's sports is on fire, or are on fire, to be more accurate with my grammar, across the board. You know, like professional women's hockey league, you've got what's going on with NCAA basketball. The WNBA has gotten so much better. We had the Women's World Cup recently of soccer that was incredibly well attended and exciting. I mean, it drew the kinds of fans. If you were talking 20, 30 years ago at the Men's World Cup, it would be absolutely on a par in terms of attendance and interest. It's really something that has been a long time coming, and you know, it makes me happy to see, you know, like we had our friend Claire Hanna on a few weeks ago on the podcast, and she talked so much about her desire to, you know, lend more to women's voices to the sports industry. And she's down there covering the women's Final Four. And I mean, I think, you know, she was emotional about it just to see how far it has come. And I think there's probably a lot of people who are in the sports industry like her, who really are proud right now of what has happened. And you know, I think it's partly because of the way networks have decided to give more, you know, coverage to the women's side of it. And now you've got this superstar, and you had these incredible games. It's great news for sports overall. It like doubles the opportunity, really, as a sports fan to get right into something. So, you know, Bobby Ryan, I don't agree with you, and I don't think a lot of people do. You know, I'm sure a lot of people do, but I think a lot of people who are understanding what this means for sports in general do not.
I think it's long overdue. And like you, Ted, I would much rather watch we touched on this last week. The women's sport is just, in so many cases, just more exciting to watch. It's just a better product at the end of the day. Tennis, golf, MMA, whatever you want to, basketball, curling. More often than not, it tends to be just more exciting to watch than the men's game. So great times for the women's college basketball athletes and that sport as a whole. And yeah, go down the list. I mean, big things in a variety of sports. So that's great news.
For a lot of people, it's about just giving it a chance, right? And now with it getting so much more exposure, they're having the chance to give it a chance. Greg, I wanted to ask you about UFC 300 coming up this weekend. And I know you follow that sport certainly more than I do. Clearly, I'm not a blood sport kind of guy, you know, not into the WrestleMania, and not that into UFC either. But how do mixed martial arts rate among mainstream sports right now?
Yeah, I'm glad we're touching on this one, Ted. And yeah, obviously a big time for the UFC. It's one of their showcase shows, a pay-per-view, but also a special one. And then it's the 300th edition of a UFC pay-per-view. And I think UFC 1 was sometime in the early 90s, and that was a much different sport. This is a product that is really, you know, right there as far as mainstream sports go. And I was listening to, I believe it was a Ringer podcast recently, where the guest said, you have to put UFC in the conversation now with the big four sports, and maybe even not, it's knocked hockey down a peg, which I thought was an interesting point. But I'm not sure you can really compare the UFC and the NHL, given that it's, you know, 82 game hockey schedule. UFC has like 15, 20 pay-per-views a year, some fight night cards, kind of a different setup, obviously. But I do think that it's right there as far as mainstream interest, and certainly has that young key demographic that all of these leagues are after. They've got it corralled and has just been a huge moneymaker. Now they're in line with the WWE, and it's like I forget the dollar figure on their new outfit, but it's an incredible product. And I really think a lot of the sports leagues, the in-game experience, can learn from the UFC, because I've attended the ones in Toronto. I was there for the big stadium show with George St. Pierre. I was there for some of the arena shows with John Jones at Scotiabank Arena, and it's next level. Just the music, the presentation. It's like a sports theatrical experience, and kind of has some of those elements of pro wrestling that are a little bit, kind of cheesy to some, but you cannot beat being at a live UFC show. They deliver. And I'd argue as well that the broadcast team, say what you will about Joe Rogan, I think he's the best, one of the best commentators going. Just incredible knowledge. Daniel Cormier, of course, a longtime UFC fighter, is also on the mic. It's just an excellent product. So I wanted to get your thoughts, Ted. I know you don't follow it too closely, but do you see mixed martial arts being more in that sports media conversation in 2024?
Well, I mean, I don't know if it's that much more. I mean, it was pretty big. Like, I'm the sports editor at the Winnipeg Sun, but since 2016, I haven't been in the office. But between 2006 and 2016, I was in the office every night, and I was deciding what stories went into the paper. And I mean, UFC was a pretty big part of what we covered, and it was, it was obviously something there was great interest in it. And I don't remember the year, but one of the UFC events came to Winnipeg, and I had the opportunity to go and cover it. And it was incredible because you're sitting like basically ringside on the floor, and the crowd is incredible all around you in a packed building, and the event is right there in front of your eyes, and it certainly was a spectacle. There's no doubt about it. And I found that there's great interest, but I still think it's, there's a certain kind of sports fan that loves it, right? It's not for everybody. But it is right up there in terms of, like, for some people, it's the absolute favorite. It's the one thing they want. You could go out many nights, certainly going back 15, 20 years, where there would be some kind of a UFC event on, and the bar would be packed with people that were there specifically to watch that. So I guess my point is, I'm not necessarily saying that it's like that much more popular now than it was, because it seemed like it was pretty popular then as well. But it is certainly one of the things that's out there, one of the options. And although I don't really partake in it because I'm not all that, it just doesn't move the needle for me. I do keep my eye on it as a sports observer to see who's winning and losing, and what the next big events are. And amazing, really, when you think about it, that before this 300 episode run of UFC started, boxing was a much more popular sport, and now it's completely, not even really thought of. It's out there. It's just not really in the heavy consciousness as it once was. When you talk about a big bout, you're probably talking about UFC, one that people are talking about.
Well, yeah, and they've come a long way from the so-called human cockfighting era of the early 90s. I think it was John McCain who coined that term, that stuck with the sport for a little while now. But as it slowly started to gain more mainstream acceptance, and certainly filled that void from boxing, which is just a shadow of its former self, I think it's great to see a fresh sport really emerge in recent years. It's been a little while now too, and just a great cast of characters too. I think that's what makes that sport really good. John Jones, Conor McGregor, Brock Lesnar, Ronda Rousey, go down the line. GSP in Canada. It's really something to see. And also, I wanted to talk, Ted, on Dana White, who has run that promotion for years. Can you imagine like a NHL commissioner Gary Bettman chiming in with F-bombs at a news conference, and just someone just laying it out the way Dana White does? It's that's also been refreshing in many ways to have a a leader of an organization just chime in honesty. Not that the others aren't honest, but they keep a lot of things in. They aren't as forthcoming with the quotes. That is for darn
Well, he
sure.
doesn't have to worry about like 32 league executives that are actually paying his salary. He makes the money on this thing, man. So what do you expect?
Well, let's talk about the Women's World Hockey Championship, Ted. PWHL, of course, on hiatus at this time, but many of the league's top players and coaches are on site in Utica, New York, I believe is where it's being held this time around. Canada 1-0 loss to the United States. Of course, many are predicting another, a fresh chapter in that storied hockey rivalry, Canada-US. What do you make of the tournament so far? And what do you think this Canadian team, which has been a little bit quieter than usual, what do you think they're capable of?
I gotta tell you, man, I don't want to sound like I'm, not understanding what's going on with sports, but like I kind of was wondering, when the PWHL came into existence and their season was going to be going on at the same time as the World Championship, I was wondering if they were actually going to just keep playing their season and bring in, maybe newer players or different players to play in the World Championship. And in my mind, I was a little bit excited about that because there is a tier of women's hockey players, especially in this country and in the United States, who just can't crack that lineup and be part of Team Canada. I thought maybe there might be an opportunity for that, but no, they've actually gone on hiatus, and all of the top Canadian players are there. All the top players around the world are there, and it's Canada, USA. The one thing I noticed so far, I thought, was that Canada hasn't really been blowing out their competition. I think their biggest margin of victory was 5-0. Like they're not getting 11-0 or 15-0 wins as they have in the past against some teams. So that suggests to me that the competition is getting a little stronger. And that's the thing that has to happen. It's the only way in my mind that international women's hockey can really establish itself the way it wants to. And that is for this to become a truly much more competitive tournament and not always be either Canada or the US winning. And I mean, I'm not saying that's not going to happen this year. It'll probably be Canada or the US that wins this year. But what would be best for that tournament would be somebody other than Canada or the US winning it. And I think everybody knows it. It's maybe just a matter of time, but it takes an awful long time to establish this. And it's been a problem for women's hockey because the International Olympic Committee has often kind of looked at it and said, how good is this if we know who the gold and silver medal winners are going to be every time? I don't, and if there's only 3 or 4 teams that are actually competitive because there was too many blowouts. Again, I'll switch back to what I was saying earlier. It seems like maybe that's not as bad this year. But maybe, it's hopefully it's growth, but it does seem like it's still baby steps in that area. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, fewer blowouts is a good thing. I mean, that's always been the thing with that event is, how many 16-0 games can you watch? So to have the countries move closer to Canada, US, Sweden, around the top there, that's a good thing for that event, no doubt about it. Speaking of big events, we got the Masters coming up here, Ted.
Oh yeah, baby.
Do you have a favorite?
Pick your non-live golfer and I'll take that person. I'm taking the non-live field.
Is that right?
Yeah, I don't know. I've followed that split pretty closely, and I understand it on some levels. Obviously, I mean, like if you're a person that's chosen to go to live golf, and you might look and you might say, well, you know what, Shohei Ohtani makes $70 million just for showing up, right? $7 million a year just for showing up. NFL players, I think I saw Baker Mayfield, 33 million a year. That's just for showing up, man. Like that's incredible. And these guys, if you're on the PGA Tour, you got to work. You got to get out there. You got to play. You got to make money. You got to win to make your money. I know there's sponsorship, obviously, so that's a little bit different. But and those guys are not hurting for dough. But the idea to switch off to this live golf, which is backed by Saudi money, which is kind of obviously pretty questionable, and then it's shorter tournaments. It's somewhat almost like exhibition. I don't know. It sits wrong with me. And it sits wrong with me that even the PGA has talked about reincorporating it, but it's been a strong enough or merging with it, but it's been a strong enough push from Liv and from the players who've moved over there, including defending Masters champion John Rahm, that they've forced the PGA to start talking about it. I think there's still a lot of tension. I think it's going to be an interesting one for John Rahm to host the Masters Champions Dinner when he was a PGA player last year when he won the Masters, and now he's gone over to Live Golf. And this is a guy who talked a pretty big game about not doing that. And you've got Brooks Koepka, Dustin Johnson, Phil Mickelson among those, from the Live side that are going to be playing. I think it's just going to make that it's going to make it interesting. It really is. I mean, there's going to be some tension, and there's going to be a lot of fans like me who are just sort of saying, I just don't want to see those guys win. So I always look forward to the Masters. It's a rite of spring. I love the azaleas. I love the tone of the CBS Masters coverage. I love the back nine on a Sunday. It's a highlight of my year. I love the Masters pool, all those things. So of course I'm right into it, and I will be. I'm not covering it, so I become fanboy for the Masters. I'll be pulling for Nick Taylor, born in Winnipeg, has had a great year, won the Canadian Open, and he's one of 4 Canadians in it, along with Corey Connors, Adam Hadwin, and of course Mike Weir. And this is the 20th anniversary of the time Mike Weir won the Masters, and that is one of the more memorable moments that I can ever remember from golf. So again, I don't know if I need to pick a winner for this to be something that matters to me. I just love watching the Masters. It's a very, very important event in my life. How about you?
I can't believe it's been 20 years since Mike Weir won the green jacket there. That was one of those big Canadian sports moments that stick in your brain. Hard to believe it's been 2 decades since. When it comes to the Live Golf PGA Tour thing, I mean, I love a little tension, no matter what the sport, no matter what the story. That's great. I think the big problem here is that there's been so much tension. It's lasted so long. And then there's kind of like they're coming back together. Oh, maybe no, they're not. When you do that, you risk losing golf fans. You risk alienating the fan base. And you're seeing it now in the ratings, which when I last looked were down 20%. I mean, Rory McIlroy chimed in on that and how that's a concern. So where does the sport go from here? And do they continue to lose fans, to lose those who are interested in the game because of this squabble, which is a big squabble, but they got to get it sorted out. I mean, it's confusing. All this back and forth, you're in, you're out. I mean, there's meetings like it's gone on too long. In my opinion, you need to sort it out for the greater good of the tour and the sport. It's gone on too long. That being said, I agree with you, Ted. I love the Masters, the tradition, and I would love to see Mike Weir make a bit of a run here. Like who knows? It'll be great to have. I love it when those former champions come back, but it'd be great to see Mikey make a little noise on the 20th anniversary of his biggest win of his career.
There's always those guys that just play great in the Masters, right? You don't hear of them all year, or they're a past champion or whatever, and then they come in and they're just so great in the Masters. It's a different event altogether, and it just is. It's something special. And I mean, Augusta National, just a beautiful golf course. And it was interesting. I actually watched last weekend. They had the women's amateur. They had a women's amateur event at Augusta. And it was really cool to watch it. There was some 16-year-old players in that field, young people, all college or younger, college age, playing, on that most iconic course in the world. And again, I just wanted to say there's another indication of how far we're moving forward with women's sports, because it wasn't that long ago when women were not even allowed at Augusta National.
Yeah, hard to believe. Great to see the women's sports on the rise, though. It's a great thing and a long time coming. Let's transition to all timers, Teddy. You got a good one on some of the boys from Slapshot. Can't wait to hear this one, bud. Let her rip.
I try to, this one I had to think for a while. It's like, we've done this now 12 episodes, and it's like, how many all-timers do I have? If we're going on for 300 episodes along this way, Greg, I think we're going to have trouble with this. But maybe I've been setting too high a standard for what's an all-timer. But this one right here, I got to tell you, is a good one. I got an assignment that the Slapshot guys were coming to town for a golf tournament, and they decided to have an event where they would all get together, and they were introduced to the media. And there was a lot of the actors from the show there. All three of the Hanson brothers were there. There was, the guy who played Tim McCracken, Dr. Hook. There was Jerry Hauser, who played Killer Carlson. There was Denis Lemieux. I mean, I don't remember. That was his name in the show, in the movie. I don't remember what his name was as an actor, but I met all of them, and we had it was a great media event. Former Winnipeg Jets tough guy Jimmy Mann was there as well. And, we talked about things like fighting in hockey. We talked about issues. We talked about how that movie itself became so iconic, and how it lasts to this day is something, that hockey fans and maybe a lot of other people like to watch. Even if it doesn't truly represent the game anymore, it certainly represents an era of hockey that was wild and crazy back in the 70s. And the neat part of the story was that as we sort of broke up, the organizer said, well, I've got a little bit of beer here. Why don't you guys mingle, have a couple of beers? And, suddenly we find that, these guys want to go for more beers. So at this point, I had only had one. I was like, okay, well, where do you guys want to go? And then, well, where's a good bar? So there was a bar called The Pint, which wasn't too far away. And I said, well, who needs a ride? So I ended up taking Jack Carlson, Dave Hansen, and Jerry Hauser. Jerry Hauser played Killer Carlson. So two of the Hanson brothers and Killer Carlson to the bar in my car. So, I mean, it made me laugh, man. I mean, I'm sending selfies to my friends, it's great. And they had some great stories, and we ended up talking forever over at the bar, and really enjoying the conversation. I have a picture with Jeff Carlson, maybe it was now. I can't remember. There was two Carlsons and Dave Hansen who made up the Hanson brothers. And the one guy had me sort of like for a photo. He's got his big fist in my face and everything. It was pretty funny. But I really enjoyed getting to know Jerry Hauser, because he is a very recognizable actor. And I talked to him a bit about, what was it like to be in a movie with Paul Newman? And Paul Newman's my all-time favorite actor. Even if he hadn't done Slapshot, he'd still be one of my all-time favorite actors, from Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, The Sting, Cool Hand Luke. Like, these are all incredible movies. And to just be that 1 degree of separation away from Paul Newman was pretty amazing. And Jerry had great stories for me. And he told me about how, he also had the distinction of having married both Pebbles Flintstone and Marcia Brady, because he played Marcia's husband on the Brady Bunch movie, and he played Pebbles Flintstone's husband in a Flintstones movie. Anyway, those guys were just hilarious and fun, and it's a night I'll never forget. And really, the lasting legacy of Slapshot, which I will watch every time it is on TV, truly is something amazing and special. And the fact that they even got Paul Newman to act in that movie still blows my mind. Greg, what do you got?
An absolute classic, Slapshot. So great to hear you had a good night with some of the guys from that classic movie. With my all-timer, like you, Ted, I was kind of jogging my brain trying to figure out what I was going to discuss, and I was thinking, I'd kind of touch on two interesting ones. I'll keep it quick. The first one, with the Rogers Center renovations, got me thinking about the old exhibition stadium where the Blue Jays played from 1977, I think, until 89 when the Dome opened. And I remember I was down there as a young lad, maybe 11 or 12, and I had a big box of popcorn, and my dad went to get a drink at the snack bar. So I'm alone in the bleachers one night. It's like 7th inning, and Jesse Barfield, legendary Blue Jay, part of that Mosby Bell Barfield outfield, steps up the plate and just clobbers one, and it is coming right at me. And I've got my big tub of popcorn, and I completely freeze. I froze, and the ball has eyes from my forehead. And I sit there like this, and I can't move. I don't know why. My dad's not there. I'm freaking out. And the crowd, all you hear is the roar, because of course it's a home run. And the ball comes and just misses my head and is caught behind me by a guy with a Houston Astros hard. He's got a hard hat that for some reason he's brought to the game, and he manages to catch it. And I was just like, oh my God. My dad comes back with his Diet Pepsi. He's like, oh, they hit a home run, eh? And I'm like, yeah, I almost got a concussion. But anyway, I always remember that when I think of Exhibition Stadium. Jesse Barkfield absolutely lasering one and nearly hitting me as an 11-year-old or whatever it was. Great memories at the X, a great old facility. But the one story I wanted to hit, Ted, we touched on it with when we were talking about competition in the business, and you mentioned as well working in the newsroom every day. It was such a different time 15, 20 years ago when you would have that sports department crew every day, and then you'd often go out for pops at the end of the shift if you weren't working that night. And in the Canadian Press newsroom, back in our old newsroom in Yonge and King in the Toronto area, it was close to some of the other outlets. The Toronto Star was just down the road at 1 Yonge Street. The Toronto Sun was just down King Street a bit. And so we would often get together and have a few pops and watch the game. And this one night, speaking of 20th anniversaries, Mike Weir, this is the 20th anniversary of the Vince Carter trade. It's coming up in December, I believe. And of course, that was a huge moment in Toronto sports history when Carter said he wanted to leave, and they ended up trading him to the New Jersey Nets. But the night I want to bring to your attention, Ted, there were maybe 15 or 20 of us. It was a well-attended crew with many friends of the pod: Steve Buffery, Doug Smith, Pierre LeBrun, Chris Johnson. We're all there having pops at a bar that's no longer there, called the Upfront Bar and Grill, where they shot part of Good Will Hunting, actually. A little fun fact there. So this is down in Toronto's downtown core, and we're all sitting there. It's around 7:30 at night. People are getting wings going. They may have a couple jugs of beer on the table. And Doug Smith, the Toronto Star basketball writer, ex-CPer, gets a call. He's like, oh, and he ends up having to take it outside. And he shares this story with us after. He goes, yeah, hi, it's Vince Carter. And Doug's like, come on. And I think he hung up on him. The guy called again. Oh yeah, it's Vince Carter. Doug, it's Vince. Vince, what's going on, man? Why? This is unusual. Why you calling me on cell at 7:30 on a Tuesday night? I'm just out with a few friends. He's like, well, I wanted to talk to you about a pretty big thing here. And it just is interesting to me, Ted, that's in this day and age where athletes just do their own thing with social media. They have control of their own thing. 20 years ago was much different. You needed a star athlete who wanted out of that particular market to call the local beat guy. Doug Smith, of course, the day one guy with the Raptors. Vince called Doug Smith, and he said, well, I've got a story for you. And so, as it turns out, it's 7:30 at night. Doug Smith comes back to our table and says, well, guys, great to see you, but I got to go. And there were other Raptors basketball writers at that event, at that table. And they're like, well, Doug, what do you mean you got to go? He's like, well, I got to go. Something's come up. So it turns out Vince Carter shared that he wanted to leave Toronto, that he was going to ask for a trade. And Doug Smith wrote obviously a page, like A1 main story, front of the paper. And there was not such a big difference, right? Today's world, you'd have online stuff, it'd be totally different. But back then, that was on the front page of the next day's paper. And Doug Smith went home, banged out a 1,000 word story with Vince's voice, and he laid it out there. And boy, obviously would have been difficult for the other basketball writers at the table seeing the next day what Doug had to leave for. And everyone was chasing the Vince Carter trade story and for reaction from there. So just amazing to me that Vince Carter calls the first time and Doug's like, come on. He hangs up, thinks it's a crank call. No.
I had one of those once, and I'll save it for another all-timer because it was a pretty funny one. But the other thing about that too, Greg, is that nowadays, even if the athlete were to phone you, and a lot of us have phone numbers for guys, but a lot of those conversations are on background, because if an athlete phoned you with a story, the organization could still threaten to take away your media accreditation because it's part of their media agreement that you have to go through the PR staff to speak to somebody. So it's kind of like they've got much more control in that situation. And of course, they would never have let Vince Carter speak about something like that because it didn't look good on the team. So I wish we lived in those days, I must say. Greg, you know what, man? This has been a great show. It's a beautiful day here in Winnipeg on a Tuesday morning. Can't wait to get outside and enjoy it a bit. I'm sure that you're going to enjoy your day doing a little Blue Jays down there in Toronto. And I think we should wrap this one up, put a bow on it, as you like to say. So with that, I want to give special thanks to our producer, Alex Antoniadis, the Toronto Metropolitan University Podcast Lab, our social media intern, Ryan McMahon. The music is by Tuesday Night Jam out of Winnipeg, and the logo design is by John St. Clair. So you can follow us on social media, and please subscribe to this podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Greg, have a great day.
Thanks, Ted. Thanks, Alex.